Here we go. Hi everyone, I'm Meteorologist Royal Norman, and this is Sonoran Sky, a live feed for you today as we're going to be discussing kind of an interesting topic for this time of year, considering most of our water in central Arizona comes from the Salt River Project. And as you probably heard, it's not a whole lot of snow up in the high country, and the reservoirs are down a little bit. And so we're going to get to some of that in just a bit. But we want to introduce you to our guest. Jacob Richardson is the one of the senior hydrologists out at SRP. How are you doing today?
Doing great.
Thanks for coming by. I was just sitting here talking to you, and I was like, okay, why a hydrologist? I think that's like the coolest thing.
Yeah, it is.
Why?
I love what I do. So I grew up here in Arizona,
yeah,
and just spent a lot of time outdoors, and I found that I really loved being around the rivers. Lakes are fun too, but I really enjoy the rivers. And so, you know, and growing up and having to make something of myself and provide for family, that was something that I really gravitated towards.
Yeah, and it seems like, I mean, I can remember when I was a kid, one of my grandparents had a little hill near their house, and I used to literally dig little dams and little canals. And did you ever do goofy stuff?
Absolutely.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I almost dug up my mom's flowers one time trying to get some water to them. So yeah, I did that as a kid. Yeah.
So at a very early age, you were kind of psyched into water.
Yeah,
huh?
for sure. Yeah.
Now, did you know though when you went to ASU, right? Did you know when you started school that you wanted to do that?
No, I mean, I always was geared towards engineering, science, and math. You know, I kind of took a lot of interest in that through school. But I spent some time outside of the country and living in the Dominican Republic about that time in my life. And what I found was they could live without power. You know, they had power that was shut off every day, but it was pretty miserable living without water. So then, you know, I came back to the States and got into school and really focused on water at that point.
Yeah, and Salt River Project is really sort of I like to call it the bellwether of Arizona water, even though it's not most people in the state don't get SRP water,
right.
About half the valley, from what I understand. But a lot of it comes from the Colorado River, and a lot of it is groundwater. But it seems like if we're doing good with SRP, the rest of the state's kind of doing good. That mostly follows, doesn't it?
Yeah, it mostly follows, yeah. That's primarily because the watershed, the Salt and Verde watershed that SRP manages, is entirely contained within Arizona. And that's unique. So like Gila River, Colorado River, those are in other states as well. So, and whereas SRP goes, that's kind of how the rest of Arizona goes.
So there are two watersheds, as you mentioned, and so tell me where they are and about the areas that they combine and come eventually into the Salt River.
Yeah, so I'll start with the Verde watershed. That's more central Arizona, like so from like Fountain Hills all the way north up to Flagstaff, even up to the south rim of the Grand Canyon.
Really?
Yeah, that's the Verde watershed. So the creeks that you might be familiar with is like Oak Creek, that rolls through Sedona. That's a Verde River tributary. Dry Beaver Creek, Wet Beaver Creek, West Clear Creek, and Fossil Springs. Those are all tributaries to the Verde River. Yeah. So they make their way down. There's like Horseshoe Reservoir that's on the Verde, and then Bartlett. Those are our reservoirs on the Verde system. That combines with the Salt River just east of Red Mountain, so east of the valley. If you're familiar with the Salt River wreck sites at Fonda Sutton, that's the confluence of the Salt and Verde. So the Salt River then extends more to the east. It's kind of just a due east type watershed. So some different orientations to those, which provide some differences in how they behave. But that extends all the way out almost to the New Mexico border. So White Mountains. So like if you're familiar with Sunrise Ski Resort, is just outside of the watershed, but it's that same mountain range. That's the kind of the north end, or like the high end of the Salt River watershed, and then it makes its way down through the White Mountain Apache tribe lands, and then eventually combines with the Verde and then through the valley.
Yeah, I know a lot of times when I was younger and didn't know so much, I'd be on top of the rim and I'd say, oh yeah, I'm in the Salt River. No, because it usually kind of comes up to the rim and it's below the rim.
Correct.
It doesn't come up to like Pine Top and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
It's everything below that comes our way.
Yeah, so almost immediately after you get on the rim, that starts to flow north. Towards the Little Colorado.
Toward the Little Colorado, and then eventually the Colorado. Yeah. And about the Verde, doesn't the Verde start somewhere around Williamson Valley up there, Paulden area?
Yeah, exactly. So Big Chino is the area. Okay. So like Chino Valley, so north of Prescott, it's just kind of a wide, expansive area.
It is. It's just wide open.
Yeah. They don't get a lot of precipitation up there, so it's not really a productive area for the Verde watershed. But there's two drainages that combine right there at, like you said, at Paulden, and that's really where the Verde River starts.
Now, of the two, is there one, you may not want to even say this, is there one that's more or less important than the other, or produces more or less water than the other, or how do you folks frame it?
Sure, yeah, so we're looking at where the precipitation falls, and there's a lot that impacts that, but primarily topography will kind of drive some of that. And so, yeah, as you go north, like north of Chino, north of Prescott, that tends to be a little drier.
Yeah.
But the north side of like the Bradshaw Mountains is in the Verde River watershed, and that's a little more productive, and so you'll see more runoff coming from that area.
Okay, I think we actually have a map of the watershed too we can put up while we're talking about it. So everything, all the water that, well, comes downhill that makes it, doesn't go into the ground or whatever, it somehow will make it into the Salt River, what used to be a dry bed, but into the whole idea of the reservoirs, et cetera, correct?
Yes, correct. So generally speaking, water flows downhill. And we take the watershed into account. We're looking at where is the water falling as it's falling from the sky, as it falls rain or snow. So a good portion of that will get soaked into the ground, and then the vegetation will take its portion too for its process. And then what's left is what you'll see in the surface water.
Right.
And so in those creeks and streams as it makes its way down. And that's what we're storing in the reservoirs, is that surface water component.
So the technology has changed over the years. I remember we're always going out with you guys to measure, actually, stick a ruler in the ground in the snowpack, although there's not much up there today. But, you physically had to go out and measure and try to figure out how much water was, and average it out. But the technology is a little better today. Would you say it's easier to get more accurate readings on what's going to be coming downhill in the form of water?
Yeah, there have been a lot of advancements in that. We still use a lot of that same technology that was developed kind of in the 50s and 60s, just because it's really reliable.
Yeah.
It does require you to be on the site to measure it, but we'll use that to kind of ground truth some of these more advanced technologies that we use. But yeah, we can sit at our desks here in the valley and see what's going on in the watershed pretty accurately and at a really high resolution in temporal scale. So some of the other technologies that are being deployed here in Arizona, there's like airborne snow observatories, which is a fixed wing plane that'll fly over the watershed and scan the ground when there's no snow. And then it'll fly over when there is snow on the ground, and it can measure the difference. And from that, we can derive how much water is in that snowpack. Yeah,
and so from these satellite or an airplane derived data, where aside you stick a pole in the ground, you're able to actually have a measurement and you have a physical sample. How do you figure out things like how much water is in that snow when you're just taking sort of a picture of it?
Yeah. That's a good question too, because not all snow is created equal.
Yeah.
And the longer the snow is on the ground, the more it changes.
Right.
So being there on site, using the tools that they're all calibrated, water, at a particular temperature, it doesn't really change in density. And so what we can do is if we know how heavy the snow is, we can derive how much water's in that. So that's generally how we'll get to that. Some of the technologies, like we call them SnowTel sites. It's like an automated measurement, and what it is actually a pillow that has fluid in it.
No way.
And and so it's got a chain link fence over it because we don't want animals getting in there.
Right.
And everything. So when the snow lands on that pillow, the weight of the snow will actually press on that pillow, and it forces fluid up into an area where we can measure the change in that fluid height. And so that's how we measure the density of that snow.
That's pretty cool. And by the way, anyone can access SnowTel sites online. Just go SnowTel Arizona and boom, they're all over the place. And you can check out how much snow is at that site or not much snow or whatever.
Yeah, correct.
So that's kind of a cool thing that everybody can do at home when they're watching the snow falling too. The other thing we're learning, at least I'm learning in recent years, is that we used to sort of think, all right, well, we got a foot of snow, all that's going to melt and come down into the river and we're in good shape. But it doesn't all make it here, does it?
No.
Why is that?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, something that has been topic of a lot of research recently, especially in the Colorado River basin, but here focused on the Salt and Verde. So temperature plays a lot into that, the soil temperature as well as like air temperature. The length of time that the snow has been on the ground plays a role, like what time in the season,
right?
And is there a lot of melting and thawing that's happening, or is it just staying frozen as snow? And what that is really driving is how much of that moisture that's in that snowpack makes it into the soil column. That's a really interesting component of it, especially this year, where we're actually above average for our rainfall precipitation thus far.
October and November were crazy.
Yeah, really. Yeah. And all that fell as rain.
Yeah.
And so all that soaked into the ground and really saturated the soils, especially in the Verde watershed. The Salt, not quite as much as the Verde. And so now there's a lot of moisture, but it's in the soil.
Yeah.
And so how's that going to play out as the season rolls on? these are questions that we're asking ourselves like currently and today.
Yeah, so I mean, I would think that because there's more moisture in the soil right now, that if we get a decent storm, say next week or whatever, maybe more of that snow might be available as snowpack and eventually melt. True or false? Can't tell.
I think to some degree, yeah, that's correct. Obviously, if we can get some snow, we'll be better off than without it. So yeah, hopefully we get some. I think the fact that we're this far into the season, we may see a little bit more of a subdued response in terms of how much is actually generated in that runoff from that snow. So we'll see. Time will help us to understand a little bit better.
Yeah, and the age-old question I get asked a ton is, why, when it rains up in the high country, again, we had a really wet fall, or, we get a huge monsoon, season up in the high country, why doesn't that help fill up our lakes? And the answer is it does help fill them up a little bit. Some of that water is making it down, but why is it, is it mostly because snowpack is there for a long time and comes at once, essentially? Is that why snowpack's more important?
That's part of it.
Okay.
Yeah. So the faster that water is being generated, that snow is melting and creating water, the less is actually soaked into the ground. And so more of it runs off as surface flow that can then be stored in the reservoirs. The other component of that is temperature, as I mentioned before. It's not just whether the snow's melting. You got to think about the watershed, how much vegetation is out there on that watershed. And all of that vegetation is pulling a lot of the water out of the soil and sometimes through its leaf structure to be able to survive. And so during the summertime, we may see as little as 1% to 4% of the water that falls as precipitation actually make it into our reservoir system.
Oh.
During the winter, that increases to like 8 to 12% of that total making it into the surface water resources. So you can just think how much water is actually being used in the soil. It's evaporating, the vegetation's using that. So it's a really big component and aspect of how much, kind of the question you're talking about is, how much is actually available for us to use. All
right, so how much is actually available? I checked this morning, and the SRP reservoirs are at 57% of average. That's great. That doesn't seem so great to me, but we're going to talk about why that isn't so bad, maybe. Yeah. We're going to talk about that and a couple of other things related to the SRP lakes and going forward in time to the next summer. We're going to do that right after this break. Welcome back to Sonoran Sky Live, a service of First Alert Weather and Arizona's Family. We're talking about the Salt River Project and the reservoirs. You know what? And our guest is Jacob Richardson, who's a senior hydrologist with SRP. We thought we'd just start off with this map, and this is one of our more optimistic models through next Tuesday at 11. By the way, we're recording this on Thursday, the 13th, right? That's the 13th? Yes, it is the 13th. And so we've got a couple of storms headed our way, and next week we could see a little bit of snow where we haven't seen much snow. Is this kind of what you folks are sort of thinking is going to happen? It's not going to be a major storm, but there could be some snow on the ground up in northern Arizona?
Yeah, especially tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow too, yeah.
Yeah, this should be a light pass, and what we're thinking is that it looks like it's probably going to be more centered over the Salt River watershed.
Okay.
But only a couple of inches, kind of like you're showing here. And then early into next week, we'd probably see something more that's centered over the Verde and probably kind of about what you're showing there too. So.
And speaking of the watershed, tell me if I think I remember that the watershed comes up here. It doesn't really include Flagstaff, but then it kind of pops up this direction. Is that kind of true?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't really include, so if it's snowing in Flagstaff, that's not coming downhill, but right out west of Flag it is.
Yep. So there's some question about actually how much of on Snowbowl and the San Francisco Peaks drains into their lower aquifer that then feeds some of the base flow for the Verde.
Yeah.
So there's some question and debate about that. But yeah, for the most part, if you just look at the topography, that's accurate.
Oh, man, you just sidebarred me on one of my big topics I'm learning about lately is, in the West, when I moved here in the 80s, it's surface water law, groundwater law, and now all of a sudden it's merging because they're all hooked together.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
Surface water is groundwater, vice versa, and everything like that. So it's really interesting that we're now looking at aquifers and also along with surface water.
Yeah, water, and the nature of that water is moving back and forth between surface and groundwater. And it's only a construct of man to be able to manage it as separate resources. Yeah.
So crazy. All right. Well, that's our snow outlook. We'll probably get a little bit over the next couple of days too. So, 57%. The reservoirs are at 57%. A year ago, they were at 71%. I look at that and I go, oh boy. Yeah. What do you guys, when you see that over there at SRP, you folks, what do you look at it and see?
Yeah. So it's kind of that half empty, half full, right? That's kind of where we're at. What we look at is more of this is a natural part of the process, and that's why the reservoirs are there. If we didn't have them, then we'd be in a much different circumstances. That's really why what made it possible for the Phoenix area to be settled like it is, and to grow as it is. Back in the 1860s, they didn't have any reservoirs, and so they just had to take what came down the river, and sometimes that was nothing, and sometimes it was a lot.
Yeah.
And so the reservoirs are there. Yeah, it's 57% full. Would we love it to be full? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the process of filling and then draining down over slowly as we meet demand, that's just part of how it goes when we operate reservoirs, and that's really the case throughout the country in different parts too.
So does that mean, in my speak, that layman's speak, that we'll probably rely a little bit more on groundwater coming up through this coming summer than actual surface water? Because you do try to keep the surface, as much surface water up there as you can, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah. So surface water is considered a renewable resource. That's because annually, as the snow, the winters and the seasons pass along, you see those surface water resources replenished to some degree. Groundwater is not considered renewable in that regard. So what we do is we want to give preference in terms of supply and demand to the surface water, and what's called conjunctive use. That's where we're managing both surface and groundwater connected, in the way that we deliver. So what we'll do every year after we have our runoff season, which usually ends in May, we'll look at how much water we have on the surface in our reservoirs, and then we'll decide how much we're going to use groundwater to help supplement the water that we're supplying to our customers.
Yeah.
And just for reference, just to kind of put it, frame of reference, the least that we'll ever use groundwater is about 10%. So as we deliver every year, we're going to use groundwater. It's our minimum pumping that we'll consider. It's about 10% of our annual demand. The most that we'll use at this point, as we look at it, and the planning that we do as we look out, it would be about 50%. Okay. So we're always going to be more heavily reliant on that surface water than we are on groundwater.
So a couple of years ago, I can't even remember the year now, but remember we had so much water and it was going down the Salt and it was going all the way to the Colorado River and it was filling up dams that it never filled up. Did that just make your heart ache, all that water going away?
Sometimes it's tough to watch, but again, it's fun to see water in the river anytime, right?
True.
So to put some numbers to that, like 2023, I think is probably the last time we had a spill in the Salt. The amount of water that what we released from the Verde and Salt system was equal to the amount of water that we deliver every year.
Wow.
And so we just didn't have anywhere to store it. Our system was 105% full. We had reached the highest level we had ever seen in Roosevelt, and so we had to let that water go. Yeah. And it made its way down eventually to Yuma and to the Colorado River.
Yeah,
so.
But the flip side of it is cool to see the river flowing. I mean, it really is. You don't get to see that a lot. Even before there was Tempe Town Lake, and there's little water down there all the time. Just, it was a big deal. If the river was flowing, you hopped in your car on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon and you went to the river and looked at it.
For sure,
because it was the coolest thing.
For sure,
yeah, totally cool. So we are in the middle of a drought, and so SRP, for as long as I've been talking with SRP people, they have always told me they're just planning for the next drought or a continuation of the drought. Is that really true?
It is. Yeah, it is. We live in the desert Southwest. And the way that we look at it is year over year, we don't know what kind of year it's going to be.
Right.
So if we look back just in the most recent years, so 2018 was, at that time, the driest year on record in terms of runoff. Right. So we went from 2018 to 2019, and we had 10 times more runoff in 2019 than in 2018. 2020 and 2021 were similar, and then 2023 is when, like I said, we were like setting a little bit of records, at least in the recent history of how much water was coming in the system. Followed up with 2025, we set a new record for a record low runoff. And so that's just the variability that we deal with.
Yeah, you never really think about that. That's a lot of up and down over the last sort of decade or so. That's an amazing amount. And as you say, if it wasn't for the dams and reservoirs, wouldn't have a chance to control any of that. Right. So going forward in time, there's climate change. There's changes to Arizona, not only in the deserts but in the high country in terms of temperature, in terms of the types of plants we're going to see. Everything is changing. We have some ideas how it's going to change, and somehow ways we don't. How do you plan for that?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
That's what gets me up in the morning, right?
I was going to say, that's the big one, right?
Yeah, so these are questions that we ask ourselves, like my family and friends, they're asking me, they know that I'm dialed in on this kind of stuff and think about it a lot, so they ask those kinds of questions. The amount of uncertainty that we deal with is nothing new to the valley, right? So the people who originally settled the area, they were dealing with that, and they knew that they had to be flexible. So they didn't have the ability to build a large dam like we have now, but they were building small dams that they could divert water out. Right. And they used the resources that they had.
Right.
As more resources became available, the federal government became interested in helping to build a dam. That helped them now have additional infrastructure, and they were able to adapt the system that way. 80s and 90s, it was really wet. A lot of flooding happening during that time. So what was on their minds is they wanted to reduce flood risk and increase capacity. So Roosevelt was modified. They built Lake Pleasant. But now we're in a situation where we're on trying to understand what are the effects of higher temperatures, right? This climate change impacts. And there's uncertainty related to that. We don't fully understand, certain forecasts tell us there's going to be more rain. It's going to come as rain, not so much snow.
Right.
Well, what's the effect of that? If we don't fully understand yet.
Right.
So I think the best that we can do in our planning is to build in flexibility and the ability to adapt, both in the way that the policies that govern what we do, as well as our operations. And then there's also the infrastructure component. So you look at the Colorado system, that's what they're going through right now, and there's been some infrastructure investments to help them with some of that ability to be able to adapt to the situation. Yeah. And we're in the same boat. The uncertainty is pretty high as we look forward.
So, yeah, it is very high, and some of the other changes that may occur because of increased temperature is that there may be less rain and snow days, but it may be more severe when it does come. That's the other thing that we're hearing. And that would be something you'd have to plan for.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because there's kind of two different ways that generate runoff. Saturation runoff, where the ground is soaked and there's no more room for it, which is kind of what happens when we have snow on the ground. Yeah. And then infiltration runoff, where the water's falling faster than the ground can soak it up. And so then you get runoff that way. So like you mentioned, if it's coming more intense than maybe years past, is it going to generate more runoff? I don't know. We'll see.
Okay. So looking to the future, you're not all concerned about 2026 in terms of water and the people you supply water and energy to. You're in good shape. Is there at any point, like if say we don't get much of a snowpack this year and then we start getting into next year with zero snowpack, is that when I should have you back in to say what's going on?
Well, obviously we'll see. We're always optimistic. That's one thing you got to have that here, right? Is that optimism. But we also want to look at it with reality, and so trying to make those decisions. Proper management has been what's allowed us the system to be as resilient as it has throughout the decades, and now 120 something years of operating the system. Yeah. And so everybody plays a role in that. There's 5 million plus people in the valley. We supply water to a portion of that. It's not all on SRP. But in that case, you can think that there's 5 million different demands out there. Right. Each of us use water in a different way. And so we're thinking that everybody can play a role in that. If you can look at what you do on a day-to-day basis and decide, what can you change that allows you to adapt to the different conditions that are out there. And we're doing the same thing as an organization.
Yeah, I know you guys are doing it. I know that a lot of people are doing it, from farmers and businesses and even individuals. But I sort of have the feeling that as long as I turn on the knob and there's water there, I'm not worried about it. And it's until I don't have water there, then I get worried. That kind of like put it off until I have to worry about it thing.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of human nature, right? Yeah. That's how we respond to a lot of uncertainties. We just don't want to deal with it in the moment because we just don't know exactly. Is it going to be a problem? We don't quite know. So that's why we're trying to be proactive, trying to look at different opportunities to change how we operate, adjust how we operate to benefit from those wet years, right? Because we have no reason to believe that those will stop. Right. Or we anticipate that that type of dry and wet pattern will continue. Right. So, looking at different things like, like changing our infrastructure, raising dams, being able to move water between CAP and SRP more efficiently, and then just making sure that we're managing our groundwater resources effectively and taking advantage of other opportunities. If you look at different cities, SRP is not necessarily involved in this, but some of the cities in the valley are looking at advanced water purification infrastructure so that they can use water more than just once.
That would be cool. That way, yeah, that would be cool. Yeah. Absolutely. And you're right about the snowpacks and the different watersheds. Over in California, they're having a banner year. Colorado, Utah, not so much. Us, not so much. So it's like, but it will return. it will return. We just don't know when.
Exactly.
So
right.
it's something that you guys have to continue to plan for.
For sure.
So as you I don't know, as you like to leave anybody that's watching with an idea of what SRP does every day in their lives, you know, that helps them, and what people can do to help you, what would that be?
So on the demand side,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So what people, like I mentioned, the 5 million plus individual demands. You know, we're a raw water supplier to the cities, and so the cities are the ones who treat it and deliver it to their customers. And so every little drop that's getting delivered to the cities or from the cities, that eventually will come from either us or CAP or Groundwater.
Right.
So that has an impact, you know, and we've seen demand decreasing since the 50s. We basically, well, since the 80s really. We use the same amount of water within the SRP service area that they did in the 50s. All right, and so that demand has continued to decrease. We'll see as things, you know, go on in the future how that pattern plays out.
Yeah. Mind your water.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point, right? Everybody plays a role in this.
It's a resource, and it's a resource that Arizona really needs.
For sure.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Jake Richardson from SRP, thanks for coming out today and talking about the SRP lakes. And we thank you for being here on Sonoran Sky Live. We'll catch you the next time.